putting a context around our gathering and then introducing Ann-Therese to you. Over the past couple of years, we've tried to hold the support teams together for quarterly gatherings via conference call, to be able to connect with one another, to share information. And really for the first couple of years, it was very much information sharing kind of forum. And then last year, we really, in response to some feedback, tried to fashion the calls so that there was some information given, there was some training provided, and so we had Sister Judy Carey present something on communication and conflict, and then Sue Lavoie, a companion in Mercy, talk about spirituality and lead us in a reflection. And in hopes that it would provide some training, but it would also give us opportunities to connect with one another, maybe on a different level. And we really liked that model, except it seemed like we were together for so short a period of time with such important topics that it just seemed a little too short. And so this year, we really felt like we wanted to focus on one issue, one area for our 3 meetings during the year, the October, the January, and April, to really provide maybe some more in-depth input, presentation, to be able to maybe go more deeply into conversation with one another and really be able to share about our experience and provide support to you in your role in working with the volunteers. And in doing that, we really felt like an important topic, both for Mercy Volunteer Corps, as well as for the Sisters of Mercy Institute and their critical concern of racism, was this whole sense of culture and talking about culture. And we may focus on it a little bit at the service sites, some discussion there, but really, particularly for our conversation tonight and for the subsequent times that we're together, to really explore what that is in the volunteer community, how that dynamic plays out. And so we're delighted to have Ann-Therese to walk with us through this call tonight and the other 2 calls, to share a little bit with us and also to facilitate some discussion around that. So Ann-Therese is a longtime friend of Mercy Volunteer Corps. She's presented at countless orientations on the topic of culture. She served as an area director for Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and in this role worked with volunteers and support teams very closely. She also served on the board of Jesuit Volunteer Corps East before they merged into one entity. Ann-Therese has led workshops for various volunteer programs and provided spiritual direction to volunteers and alumni of volunteer programs during and after their volunteer experience. Her emphasis areas tend to be social justice, cross-cultural ministry, racial justice and healing, social analysis, and spirituality. Currently, Ann-Therese is the director of pre-college programs for Philadelphia Futures, an organization which provides Philadelphia's low-income first generation to college students with the tools, resources, and opportunities necessary for admission to and success in college. So with that, we're delighted to have you with us, Ann-Therese, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Marie, and congratulations to everybody for passing the technology test tonight. I think that this is kind of a fun experiment to try to connect with one another this way, and I hope that all of you will also have some patience, because I think we're probably going to have a couple little glitches as we move along, but hopefully for the next 2 sessions following this, we'll be able also to kind of sharpen things up as we move forward. Sometimes it has to do with the internet signal that you have. Sometimes it has to do with the plane that's flying overhead. Sometimes it's the cat that runs into the room and meows. So if any of those things happen during this time together, I hope we'll all be able to be patient with each other. I was really excited when Marie asked me to participate in this kind of ongoing series with all of you. As she said, I've been a longtime friend of the Mercy Volunteer Corps, and I would actually say that I've been a friend of Mercy Volunteer Corps even before I was an adult, because I went to a high school where Mercy Volunteers were a real backbone to what happened in our time. So we don't have our friends from St. Michael's on right now, but I went to St. Catherine Indian School in Santa Fe before it closed, and Mercy volunteers were very instrumental in our education there. So I have a lot more to say about that later, but I just wanted to say that by way of hello to everybody. And Sister Judy, I feel especially jealous because I see the beautiful beaming sun behind you. And I think all of us may feel a little jealous right now. And if you do, nod your head a little bit so we can all see the jealousy for the beautiful sunshine of San Francisco. That's great. You know, let me start just by saying a couple things about sort of the purpose, as I understand it, and some goals that I would like to provisionally offer. And then maybe we can do some introductions and start talking with one another just a little bit. I really am seeing these sessions as a time to facilitate a series of 3 kind of webinars to explore ways to support to explore ways that support teams can discuss how you can actively support volunteers as they encounter culture and cultural differences. And not necessarily just in ministry, but especially in community life. So that's a little bit of what's framing us. And Marie, did I catch that as you were hoping it to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, good. And I would see that there's some goals that I would hope for from tonight and maybe for the other 2 webinars that are coming up in the future. One is I'd really like to see if we can share with each other ways that our volunteers are experiencing culture in their mission settings. And also that this can be a forum for all of us to process issues that arise in supporting volunteers, once again, especially as it relates to culture. And we'll talk about culture in a minute and sort of the many forms that it takes. But what would be helpful to me, I think some of you may know each other or at least have some familiarity with one another, but I wonder if we could start with just introductions. If you could say who you are and where you're webinaring in from. And then just a question for you, maybe by way of introduction, is how do you think exploring cross-cultural differences in community, both big and small, is reflective of Mercy values? So if we can use that as a way to sort of check in, that would be great. And I don't think we need to go in a certain order, but if everybody could check in, that would be helpful. So who are you, where are you webinaring in from, and how do you think exploring cross-cultural differences and culture is reflective of Mercy values? And maybe, Marie, maybe you want to call on folks. Maybe that's easier.
Sure. John, would you mind starting us off?
Except you're on mute.
You're on mute. Sorry. Still on mute.
John, if you can hear us and you can unmute, that would probably be good.
Okay. While he's figuring out that, Sister, do you mind jumping in and starting us off?
Marie, I'm not sure who you just called on, but Nancy and I will start.
Yay.
Right, thank you.
Okay. I'm Lisa Griffith, and I'm in Savannah, Georgia, working with the volunteers. And this is my 3rd year as a support team person. And you know, I think we've had mixed results on maybe, I don't know if it's the clash of the culture for some groups, but I think, I mean, you know, working with each other's cultures and I think it's more than tolerating. People use the word tolerate, and I don't think tolerate's the right word. I think it's more about cherishing where each person comes from and what their culture is, and learning from one another. And I think that plays right into what the Mercy values are.
Thanks.
Nancy Donovan, I think I need more time with the question. I mean, I think it's constitutive of a need in the world to have a greater appreciation of culture, and certainly is something that in the Mercy world we're very aware of. But probably need a little bit more time with that.
Sure. Thank you. I wonder, Jason, would you be able to start us off? I think you might still be on mute also, Jason. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jason Downer. I'm a support person for the New York community. This is my first year, and I was a Mercy volunteer in 0304 in New York as well. I think this topic is they're coming from a really diverse background. Not only that, but learning the culture of New York, the sites they're working at, they're experiencing a lot of differences that they haven't really encountered before. But I've especially noticed it in their community living, with different cultures coming together. I hear a lot when I go and meet with them is the need and desire for being respected, the culture is appreciated and heard as they learn to live together. So I think this is really, really important topic. Thank you.
Thanks. I wonder maybe Joan, Sister Joan?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm Joan Marie O'Donnell from San Francisco. And I think my first thing I think of is the great cultural diversity that we have here in San Francisco and California, and wanting to be sensitive to that. And when I think Mercy values, I think of inclusiveness. And that means inclusiveness of all people, culture, sexual orientation, etc. And I'm happy to, this year in our monthly session on communication and conflict, we're looking at it from the point of view of culture as well.
Wow.
So this is great. This is terrific.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
John?
Am I unmuted?
You're perfect now. That's great.
Okay, great. I'm John from Baltimore, the support person. And kind of a bit like Nancy, I think I'd like a little longer to dwell on the question, especially when race is such a big issue here in Baltimore. I'd be interested to see really how the year works out, because this our 4 girls are all kind of from like the Midwest area. So it'll be interesting to see, in talking with them, their experiences of coming into a very racially fired up sort of city.
Sure. Thank you, John. And Judy, I think that leaves you.
I'm Judy Carl, and I'm right now on Notre Dame Dana Moore campus university, and 2 of our Mercy Volunteer Corps are at a volunteer fair, and they're doing really splendidly. So I'm out here enjoying the sun. We have had volunteers now for our 2nd year. And I'm just thinking that 3 of the 4 of our volunteers are Mexican heritage. And this is a question that I would ask of them, I think, as we go on, is, or at least observe, how is the dominant culture, which is Mexican, how is that for everyone? And I just think it's a really important question for us to look at as Mercy. It's something that in the Mercy community. I went to an anti-racism workshop about 2 weeks ago and became very, very aware of racism and white privilege. And I would also add another kind of culture here, and that would be one of our volunteers is working at he's fitting in beautifully. The people, the volunteers went and joined him at work he had, and they said they were so accepted by the elderly. So that's else at this point.
That's great. Thank you. And Marie, I can't tell if Sister Jerry is on or not.
She is, but she's still muted. But Chris, are you on the phone? Chris, are you here?
Yeah, but it's hard to hear.
It's hard to hear. Sorry, I was just going to see if maybe you had anything to share. On
So
the question.
Chris, I don't know if you heard the question, but hello, we're asking just for an introduction of yourself, who you are and where you're coming from, but also just wondering if you have a sense of how exploring culture as a support person for your community is an expression of Mercy values.
Could you repeat the question again? It's very jumbled. It's not coming through clear.
Why don't you try, Marie?
Yeah. So introducing yourself and then explaining how you feel that culture is expressive of Mercy values. Did you hear that more clearly?
I'm Chris, and I'm a support person at St. Michael in Spartanburg, Arizona, with special ed. They work at special ed. And I think the culture itself very much lends itself to a life of simplicity, where we're at, they're learning to make ends meet with very little, but they're also working and realizing how much the people around them have less than they have. They think they're living a life of luxury, I think. I don't know if that answers what you're asking, but culturally, I'm thinking that simple living piece is just lends itself very much to where they're at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody for just beginning, and I also can really appreciate, Lisa, even your request for a little bit more time on that question, because it is a hard one to think about, because I think that culture is such an expansive notion, and I also think that literally right now in this country, there are so many clashes around issues of culture just being played out daily in the news and probably daily in our lives and in our ministries. I don't think it's an easy question to answer to begin with, so I appreciate you for saying that, and John, for you echoing that a little bit as well. I thought maybe as just a point of beginning, and just to give you a little context for me, since we're going to be hanging out together today and in January and in April, you know, Marie talked a little bit about kind of what I do and what I've done, but I also think about the story of culture as really important in my own life. And I think that as support people, I'd really encourage all of you to think about the ways that stories of culture in your own life have kind of developed and evolved, and how they might be gifts for you as you serve in a support role for volunteers. And I thought maybe I'd start by just trying to model that a little bit by thinking a little bit of what has the story of culture been in my life thus far. And I'm just going to pick a couple of sort of highlights in time. And the first thing that I guess I would want to say is, you know, I'm a Latina who grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I often say Latina because unless you're from the Southwest, if I were to describe myself as a Chicana, most people wouldn't know what that meant. But maybe my friends in California and all over the country in Mercy Land do have a sense of that. But I often will sort of just do shorthand as describing myself as Latina. And growing up in Santa Fe, I grew up mostly in a tricultural context. And that would be, you know, the Latino community, the Native American community, and the Caucasian community. So that was mostly what I grew up in, and I mostly found myself in circles predominantly of Latino people. When I went to high school, I went to St. Catherine's Indian School and was one of 50 day students at a Sister of the Blessed Sacrament high school that was founded for Native Americans. And so there were about 250 students there. 200 were Native American students from throughout the Southwest, and 50 students, we were primarily Latino with a couple of Caucasian students as well who were commuting in as day students. That's when I first met Mercy volunteers. They were volunteering in the dorms at St. Gates and teaching some of the classes. And it was really powerful for me as a high school student to see people who were not much older than I was packing up from all over the world, it seemed like to me, but mostly from back east, you know, coming to the West and really coming with an authentic curiosity about us and a real deep desire to help us. And that was something that even as a high school student was very clear to me. And I think my appreciation for Mercy and for Mercy volunteers permeates my life because of that particular experience with Mercy volunteers. And that was back in the 80s. So if that gives you a little context of time, that'll give it to you. I left the comfort of my cultural home in New Mexico when I went to college in California. I went to Santa Clara University and found myself in a very different cultural context than I had growing up or when I was in high school. In high school, it was kind of characterized by what did it feel like to be in the minority. So to be a Latino student among predominantly Native American students, how did I find a way to sort of navigate that? That was an important thing for me. When I went to college, I then found myself to be part of a very small number of people of color on that campus, and then sort of orienting to what that meant for me in my world. And so naturally that took me to a little bit of activism, and found myself also in the 80s working a lot towards an anti-racist sort of spirit of activism on the campus, working together with the Jesuits and other students to really say, what does it mean to live in a mutual community of learning and respect? So I think that was pretty formative. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit and talk about my experience immediately after college. I lived right next door to a Sister of Mercy when I volunteered on the Hoopa Reservation up in Northern California. And that was Sister Pat Carson, who I think is still out there right now. And my opportunity to live on the Hoopa Reservation and provide services to high school students there, again, was another immersion in kind of being somebody who was not of the dominant culture, but who wanted to be really respectful and kind of learn about it and also contribute what I could to it. That really was formative. It helped me kind of with the next steps of my life, which included graduate school and studies that brought me out to the East Coast. So a couple of those pieces for me speak a lot about what did it take to have people who could companion me. So I think of Sister Pat in Hoopa. I think about the Jesuits at Santa Clara. I think about the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament and the Mercy Volunteers at St. Catherine's. Having people in my life who could help me navigate cultural differences was really important. I know you know that. I know that's partly why you're a support person, but I just want to say, I think when we consider our own cultural stories, also considering who was an important figure in that can help us as we kind of relate that with other people. Sort of fast forwarding a great deal, I would say an additional pivotal experience for me was when I went to El Salvador after my time in Hoopa, and had an opportunity right after the war in El Salvador to really just explore and learn more about cultures there and what had happened in terms of US intervention and some of the atrocities that happened in that country. I find myself in Philadelphia today, an administrative leader in a nonprofit organization where we're working predominantly with African American and Latino people in Philadelphia. And I feel like the gifts of growing up in New Mexico and going to school in California and knowing Sisters of Mercy all along the way sort of position me to help bridge a bunch of worlds. I need to work with funders. I need to work with kids. I need to work with families. I need to work in a dysfunctional school system. And so I'm crossing cultures all the time. And I think being able to equip ourselves with sort of understanding what the tools were that helped us get to that point can be really important. So I've just kind of given you a boring biography about me with some of the highlights along the way, but part of why I want to do that is I think what I might have done for you is to model a possible activity that you could do with your communities, but would probably require some leadership from you in terms of how do you model a story about sort of how important is culture in your life, or how has it played a role in shaping your life. If I were going to outline my own story a little bit more closely or tell it in a little bit more detail, I probably could find some really important points for reflection, but I'm not going to do that with all of you because I don't think we need to do that together. But you could construct this activity in a way that helps to model for the volunteers a way to reflect on their own culture and a way to share that with one another. Because one of the premises that Marie shared with me when she talked about this series of webinars was the whole notion that of course, volunteers are crossing cultures in their ministries. But as many of you mentioned, there's all kinds of cultures, you know, whether it's a culture of age or a culture of racial background or economics. There's all kinds of cultures that are happening. And Marie particularly asked me to explore, what does it mean in the house community where volunteers live? What does it mean for volunteers to learn about each other and get along with each other? And I think that's a really important kind of angle to get at that, because sometimes we can think it has to do with, you know, just relationships and getting along, but especially in our broader context of culture in the United States these days, I think if we can model a community that's reconciling, a community that's transformative, a community that embodies mercy, I think that can help our volunteers when they have clashes with one another that might actually be rooted in culture. So I'm going to pause for a second and just ask if people have any kind of general feedback to sort of that initial big blur of information. I'm going to pause for a second and see if anybody would like to say anything. Hoping that you will. All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of keep pushing forward a little bit, and talk a little bit then about a framework, I think, for our time together. And what I'll do is I'll send these to Marie. I know you guys actually have these documents in life, but I wanted to reflect particularly on Mercy Volunteer Course Theology of Mission. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but there's in the second paragraph, there's a particular part of it that I'm going to ask you to kind of listen to reflectively, and maybe even jot down some words that you hear that are important to you, because in a moment, like I'll read it twice, in a moment I'll ask us how the theology of mission speaks to your work as a support person or as a part of the support team for your community. So from the theology of mission, it says, we seek to model service that is characterized by accompaniment, mutuality, and respect. We strive to respect the life and dignity of each person with whom we live, serve, and pray, ever conscious of God's presence in all of creation. In our service, community, and prayer, we reach out in love and mercy and learn to receive love and mercy from others. Opening ourselves to God's transforming grace, we hope to be instruments of peace and agents of change in the world. So I'm going to kind of let that soak in for a minute. I'm going to read it one more time, and then I'm going to ask for each group to kind of just say a couple words about sort of what is the spark in you as a support person, especially around the notion of culture. So once again, from the theology of mission, we seek to model service that is characterized by accompaniment, mutuality, and respect. We strive to respect the life and dignity of each person with whom we live, serve, and pray, ever conscious of God's presence in all of creation. In our service, community, and prayer, we reach out in love and mercy and learn to receive love and mercy from others. Opening ourselves to God's transforming grace, we hope to be instruments of peace and agents of change in the world. I really don't want to call on people, but I know it's kind of hard because you're not sure who's going to chime in. But could each of you say something sort of in response to that part of the theology of mission as it relates to your work as a support person, kind of exploring culture with your community?
This is Nancy.
Hi.
I guess the word that kind of sticks out for me is the word transform.
Yeah.
It actually comes up for me in my ministry when I, pray with people or when I'm giving out communion. My ending prayer always asks that we be transformed by God's love, by Eucharist, and bear witnesses. So I guess it's, I think that's what I bring to the working with the volunteers is like the, helping them to see the world differently. And it ties back to the cultural piece because at least in our situation, the women we have are white women And so, and they're working in poor areas, and here those that happen predominantly African American, though we have a Hispanic population. So working, helping to transform them in their mind views. Not just me, but the ministry experience, but then the reflection on that.
Right. So that reflection piece is an important part of the transformation. Thank you.
This is Joan, and the word mutuality stands out for me. And so far, in my own personal experience with our volunteers this year, part of the mutuality comes around sharing our stories. You know, our own stories, coming to know one another that way. And I think we've done quite a bit of it in the last couple of months, and it's been really a joy, and it's been enlightening. And the other thing is I happen to share, I volunteer at one of the ministries where one of our volunteers actually works. And so when I'm there, we both share. There's mutuality there too. We have a chance to be present with those that come from a great diversity of culture and sexual orientation, and you name it. And it's wonderful to have that kind of mutuality happening among us.
Thank you. Thank you. Others?
This is Judy, and I'll speak because I think my phone might be running out of power in a few minutes. I'm just thinking that's a really strong and beautiful statement, and it so reflects the Sisters of Mercy Constitution. And what I'm pretty impressed by is how quickly our volunteers have got into the Mercy story, and how anxious they are to bring others into this. So what they're doing is they are receiving, and they know it, and then they are very anxious to be able to give. And it's kind of powerful to see how that's happened within them, even in this very short time.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, others?
This is John. I think for me, the word accompaniment plays a strong role in my presence as support person at Baltimore. And obviously each year that experience or that degree of accompaniment will vary. But I think in creating safe space for our volunteers, I think it's also important for me as a support person to know when to step back with the accompaniment. Because after all, it's their journey, it's their year. And sometimes you need to let them step into that on their own as well. And that to me is an important element of a support person.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Jason from New York. I think for me, I agree with John, the word accompaniment really stood out for me. The number of times I've been with the community, I've been in awe of them. First of all, a lot of cultural issues, age and ethnicity, where the geographic regions where they're coming from, and they're struggling with it. And a lot of it's being unsaid right now. And so I've had to push them a little bit to acknowledge some of those issues, knowing, like, John, I can't make them fix it. There's something they have to be honest about and authentic about as they come to grasp those issues themselves. It's going to be uncomfortable at times, but I've seen that first start of asking those questions to each other and being aware of it. And so the best I could do is accompany them through that process and be there for them.
So it sounds like really just helping to support their awareness of the difference, but also helping them to be authentic in the discomfort, right? And letting them know it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's okay. Like, we can move through this together. Thanks for that, Jason. And I don't know if Lisa, you wanted to add anything to it?
Sure. with the part that that caught me was the mutuality and respect, but from the point of view of trying to work with the volunteers of how they can be respectful of one another while keeping themselves open to learning from each other.
Yeah.
And not just saying, well, this is what I do in my culture, this is the way I do it, and that's the way you do it. It's like, how can we learn from each other and really be open to changing our own ways about things sometimes, and joining in on that together.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to come back in a minute with some of the things that you talked about, because I think that they're really going to help us with the structure going forward. The other thing that I wanted to offer, as I thought to be sort of a helpful component in the framework, was a particular definition of culture that I found. And again, I'll make sure that we can email this out to all of you so that you can have it in your resources. But this definition comes from the Institute for Democratic Renewal and Project Change Anti-Racism Initiative. And I'll send that to you in the website that it comes from. But so the definition of culture here, and I especially want to pay attention to the second part of it, is a social system of meaning and custom that is developed by a group of people to assure its adaptation and survival. These groups are distinguished by a set of unspoken rules that shape values, beliefs, habits, patterns of thinking, behaviors, and styles of communication. And I'm going to just read that one more time because we don't have it visually for you to see right now. But this definition of culture is a social system of meaning and custom that is developed by a group of people to assure its adaptation and survival. These groups are distinguished by a set of unspoken rules that shape values, beliefs, habits, patterns of thinking, behaviors, and styles of communication. And I wanted to, there's a bazillion definitions of culture, obviously, depending on what point of view that you are coming to this conversation. And I picked this one because it talks about that set of sort of unspoken rules, right, that shape the values, beliefs, habits, and patterns of thinking. And I was really struck by each of you, either in the check-in or in the reflection that we just had, already talking about culture as not what oftentimes people think is obvious culture, right? So often we think about race and ethnicity as obvious culture. And I think it's very important that we keep that as a very important touchstone, right? But we mentioned sexual orientation, we mentioned age, right? There's any number of sort of cultural differences. We have geography. So those all are pieces that come together in community, right? When they're living with one another. And sometimes they just mesh beautifully, and sometimes they become the very locus of clash. And then when you take that local community experience and you go out into mission, and you're working with people who also may be of a different cultural background than you, whether it's economically or racially or ethnically, this is a whole big recipe, I'm going to say, for creative conversation and transformation. Other people might say it's a big recipe for disaster and conflict, but being the hopeful Christian that I am, I believe that this is the opportunity for transformation. And I think that when we consider this notion of culture and cultures being distinguished by a set of unspoken rules, right, that shape values, beliefs, habits, and patterns of thinking, I wonder, does that jive with your experience of culture kind of writ large, or culture with the volunteers as they're discovering culture in their own lived communities in their homes?
Yeah.
And Joan, you're shaking your head yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything you want to say on that? Well, I think that's going to be one of the things I'm actually going to ask Marie in the sort of interim time between our meetings to send out these resources, and I'll send some others. And I promise, especially for Nancy, when you said, I really want to think about this question more, I want to send some things out to you ahead of time so that you will have had the opportunity to think and pray about these things before our next session. But the question that I'd like us to talk about next time is, how does this definition of culture inform your work as a support person, right? So that maybe it's both kind of generally the idea of being a support person, but it might also be between today, October 18th, and January 17th, that there's going to be experiences that you have supporting your communities where you've kind of helped to navigate some clashes or some great discoveries, and you want to share them with the group so that people can benefit from your experiences as well. And again, Marie, I'm just going to look for a nod from you. Does that seem like that's a good approach to it? Mm-hmm. And for the support people, does that feel like that would be helpful for you all?
Yeah, could you, this is Nancy, could you also send that original question again?
I sure will. I will.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, and this is based a little bit on what I kind of came to the conversation with, but also what I'm hearing from each of you. For the next two webinars, I think that there are 3 guideposts that I'd like us to be looking towards. And I want to kind of invite all of you to use these guideposts when you're thinking about your interactions with the volunteers kind of between now and January. And the first guidepost is mutuality, which of course is a lovely mercy value, but the whole notion of what does it mean to have authentic exchange? What does it mean to kind of not just be the giver or the receiver, but somebody who recognizes that both of those things need to happen together? So mutuality would be the first guidepost. The second guidepost is the whole notion of transformation, you know, and a couple of you talked about the whole idea of transformation within the theology of mission, but isn't transformation also our basic approach as followers of Jesus, right? We believe that transformation of our hearts and of our world is who we're called to be. And then I want to go to the third guidepost of really recognizing the mercy critical concern of racism. Some of you talked about the work that you're doing, whether you're getting involved in the anti-racism workshops that are happening kind of in Mercyland, or some of your own study and work. But I think, again, I can't say enough about the current sort of political atmosphere right now. And I think the pitch that's being raised, John, you certainly have been living it in Baltimore. When we talk about sort of local things that have gone national in terms of racial tension and racism and structures of race, I think all of us have that experience in different ways. And if we can be lights that are helping our volunteers to make sense of what is a time right now of clash and conflict, but recognizing where they can claim their hope and where they can be bringers of hope in their community and in their mission work. So I want us to think about mutuality, transformation, and this notion of really understanding, exploring, and addressing racism as things that are going to kind of inform our work going forward. And as I'm looking at our time, I think we have about sort of 5-ish minutes to go. And then I want to kind of let us wrap up a little bit sort of between Marie and me. But one of the things I wanted to do kind of as a way to check in with all of you, I think that there's a couple of things I'd like to explore together. And one is, given that the organizing principle for us is going to be culture, and especially culture in the volunteer community, I want to just ask you how you think that this forum, this webinar, might be helpful to you. And an example that I might give is you might say, you know, Anne-Therese, next time we'd like you to maybe send us some articles ahead of time that we can read and share together. Or maybe we can talk about some activities that we can do when we get together with the volunteers. Those are all some things that I'd like to be able to offer if you're interested. But also I would suggest that if you have like a case study or like a situation that happened in the local community that you're supporting, that you'd like to share in this kind of confidential support group, I think that could be helpful. We could benefit from the shared wisdom of one another. So those really are just a couple of examples I might give about things that might be helpful for you that I think that I could offer or facilitate. And that, again, is kind of readings and resources, activities, and the opportunity for you all to bring some case studies forward. But could you all talk with each other and with Marie and with me about what appeals to you, what like kind of makes you roll your eyes and say, oh no, don't let's do that? Or if there's other things that you have in mind that you think would be helpful.
I'd like to say that both the things you mentioned, the articles and the activities, that's always really helpful. I always appreciate that. I think the other thing is, I know for us, we'll have an opportunity in the fall to actually do some of this, you know, with our volunteers at the monthly session. And there might be something that comes out of that we could bring to this call.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Antrice, this is Nancy. I think what would help me, because your opening reflection question, to see it on paper. So
Yes.
if there's some poignant question for reflection, that could be given out ahead of time. That way I can read it and process it.
Yep, I definitely promise. And Marie and I are also going to work together to see if we could do a shared screen. So I might actually be able to put some things up. But I had a couple of my own technical difficulties today too. But having that ahead of time, I'm certainly happy to do.
And I also like the idea of some activities that we might be able to do with the volunteers.
Yes.
Would be great.
Great. Okay. Terrific.
I agree with I really
Jason? Yeah.
activities. That'd be really good. Thank you.
Terrific. And how about you, John?
There's nothing comes to mind just yet. I'm just kind of interested to see where all this goes with us. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, I think I'm also going to try to sort of write something up that's talking a little bit about where we were today, kind of where we're hoping to go, so that you've got some time, certainly between now and January. But I'm also going to be in touch with Marie at different touch points during the fall. So if there are things that are coming up or resources that I find along the way and can send along, I'd love to do that if there's kind of interest from all of you. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to be the appointment that you're dreading. You know, I really want to be a resource to all of you, because what you're doing for the volunteers is so important. So if we can shape this, you can call me Gumby. I will bend in whatever direction that you like and try to bring whatever kinds of experience I might be able to bring. But I also know for sure that the expertise that all of you bring is almost more important. And if I can help facilitate a sharing of that, I'd like to do that as well. So Marie, I think that might sort of do it for me for now. And to all of you, I just want to thank you for your time and your patience with some of our technical weirdness, but we'll be better in January. I know that. And I'll send some, as I said, I'll send some things to you from this call, also with some questions to be thinking about along the way as we move forward. Are there questions or kind of any closing comments before we do some of the closing announcements Marie might need to make?
This is Judy, and I'm going to have to sign off because my phone is near-ended with any kind of power, and I also have to drive the ball at this point.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us tonight, Judy. Thank you.
Very helpful, and I'll pick the memory.
Great, thanks. Okay. I often will ask this of volunteers just before we close something out, and I don't want it to be too much of a stretch if it's not something that's an easy answer right now, but is there one thing from this call, an idea, an invitation, or a challenge that you can take away with you sort of between now and January? And I wonder if each of you could just say just a word or two on that.
I think awareness, just a heightened awareness.
Yeah, thank you. Others?
I feel like I've sat through several presentations on culture, especially orientation, but that consideration of what's my own cultural story, and how is that shared, or how is that impacting relationships is really something I'd like to spend more time with.
Thanks, Marie. Anybody else?
I guess for me, I would say the word depth comes to mind, and the depth of this conversation can add to our community life.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for this time together this evening. And I really do look forward to continued conversations with you all moving forward. And Marie and I will be in touch with each other, and Marie will kind of be a conduit for getting information out to you. But if you have questions or feedback or anything that you'd like to pass along to me, Marie also, I'm volunteering you, would be happy to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Thank you.
And just to echo those two pieces, I know that the coordinators are in the midst of making site visits in some cases, or will be visiting over the next couple weeks. And so anything that might be helpful to share with them in person, we have regular meetings, and you know, have been aware of some of just the different differences that have come up within community life. And so feel free to utilize them, and then also, you know, that they can share that information, or you're more than welcome to email me or call me to have a more direct conversation. But, and then secondly, we will see how, I mean, I've really appreciated the face-to-face. I just think, especially with a topic like this, it's so nice to be able to see each other's faces and to really, you know, be able to share in that way. So we'll continue to work on the format. We tried the webinar with the volunteers actually last year, and it comes together, but it's not pretty, and it's not always everybody's. So I'll continue to play with what might be some other formats that doesn't make the beginning feel so bumpy. So thank you again for your patience in that, and Antries for yours especially.
Sure. Well, thanks everybody. God bless and have a great night tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.